Hi everyone, Don't Leave Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Tropical Fuckstorm album, A Laughing Death in Meatspace. This is the debut full-length album from Australian underground rock supergroup Tropical Fuckstorm, featuring members of bands such as Palm Springs and High Tension and The Drones, with Gareth Lydiard on guitar and vocals, Fiona Kitchen on bass and vocals, Lauren Hamill on drums, and Erica Dunn on guitar and keyboards. And this thing is easily one of the most gnarly and electrifying and apocalyptic rock albums I've had the pleasure of listening to all year. Now, if you're familiar with the parties involved and you've watched recent reviews of mine of records like I See Seaweed and Feeling Kinda Free from The Drones, it shouldn't be surprising that you're going to hear elements of blues and art punk and noise rock on this album. But despite being a band of average size, Tropical Fuckstorm has managed to drum up this larger-than-life sound that also showcases elements of psychedelic rock and like some subtle industrial elements too. There are a lot of linear song structures on this album that get progressively more and more intense as these tracks plot along, with Gareth pulling off a lot of these really dejected and weary vocal performances, whether he's singing or kind of narrating his way through a track. And his vocals, as well as the very hectic instrumentals on this thing, are heavily enhanced by Fiona's very chirpy and bright, sharp, colorful vocal harmonies. There are a lot of moments on this thing where the tracks have kind of a meditative pacing, a very intense crescendo at the finish, kind of like a great spiritualized track. But then there's also maybe a dash of like Birthday Party and very early Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds in the mix on this thing too. Also, the combination of very gnarly and noisy guitars and kind of tortured and depressed male vocals and these bright vocal harmonies hanging in the background reminds me a bit of Silver Mount Zion. This record is something I feel like the post-rock fans could definitely appreciate. However, this is not a post-rock album. There is not a tedious formulaic crescendo on this record to be heard. It's like the gargantuan size of that genre, but with all the cliched trash just kind of left on the side of the road. Also, there are moments on here where I feel like I'm listening to an evil, demented Arcade Fire. Like, maybe this is how the band's album Everything Now would have sounded if the cultural commentary was actually on point, and if Satan himself had produced it. This thing is 9 tracks long, 40 or so minutes, and pretty much all the tracks on here find a very good balance of being cerebral, heady, thoughtful, but also very raw and straightforward. The song You Let My Tires Down is a perfect opening statement on this record, a track that features these thunderous riffs and strung out guitar leads that suddenly transition into a very subtle bed of drums and bass, on top of which Lydiard delivers these very weary vocals about somebody in his life who is in trouble with the law. They wounded a rent-a-cop. He has to kind of deal with this person's legal issues now. They're going a little nutso because they're off their medication. It's like a combination of a heartfelt ballad, a seedy story, with an incredibly blistering noise rock crescendo at the finish. It's the kind of track that really just pulls at your heartstrings, but using like barbed wire. The next track, Antimatter Animals, are where some of the more industrial elements on this record pop up, with all of these fuzzy, buzzy, scuzzy bass and synth tones. The beats sound heavily treated and very choppy, very boomy, kind of like they were snipped and sampled and cycled over and over and over. The track feels a lot less organic than its predecessor, kind of like the band came up with a bunch of weird sounds in the studio and then sort of hodgepodged them together. However, it's no less thrilling to listen to than a lot of the other tracks on here. In fact, it's not too unlike a lot of the groovier and more electronic moments off of the Drones' last album, Feeling Kinda Free. And there's something just deeply sinister about the sound and the music on this track that just feels like a long ago buried evil that is finally now rearing its ugly head. If there's anything holding the track back, it does have one of the more cumbersome grooves on the entire record. I do think the pacing could have been a bit better. However, that's not as much of an issue on the roaring Chameleon Paint, which has these booming kick drums, a bass line that lurks like a serial killer, these warped and sliding guitar leads. It all creates a very dark atmosphere. Meanwhile, Lydiard's lead vocals kind of sound like they're drawled or kind of stumbling over themselves like he's drunk out of his mind. And the lyrics portray this fanatical person kind of moralizing and shoving their ideology down other people's throats, like a dick. The sagely advice that they're kind of giving out is portrayed more as sagely abuse. Also, the line on this thing about having a POV not making you an NGO really stuck with me, and kind of said that this person clearly in their own head has deluded themselves into thinking what they're doing is for the greater good. Then the band changes gears with the incredibly tense and exhilarating The Future of History, which features more cartoony, weird, dissonant guitar leads and bass lines. I feel like I'm watching a twisted animated short where the world is like burning to a cinder, or maybe a meteor shower is just blasting the planet into oblivion, or a total nuclear holocaust, which is not too far off base considering how apocalyptic, violent, and tongue-in-cheek a lot of the lyrics on this track are. Then there's the chilling soft power, which lyrically seems to focus on how aggressive foreign policy across the world has gotten over the past few years. Of course, in the lyrics there are a few obvious shots at Trump, and why not? I mean, he's kind of contributed to this. The track also features some of the most devilish guitar work on the entire record. There's also an odd vocal break in the second half where it sounds almost literally like I'm listening to a long-lost musical transmission from like a bomb shelter. It's a pretty dark moment on the album, and then we have a very necessary instrumental breather immediately after this with the track SHELLFISH TOXIN, which features some like beach sound effects and very eerie synthesizers. It sounds like circus music if the world were the circus and tonight's entertainment was everyone starving to death. The title track is easily one of the most painfully sad moments on the entire record. It's a bit of an aftermath, kind of like the calm after the storm. Very evocative sound play. It kind of sounds like the world's death rattle. One of the more emotive vocal performances on the album too. There's an incredible build of guitar and vocal harmonies at the very end of the track as well. It's a track that I think could have been a perfect closer, but then the album goes on to the song Rubber Bullies, which is easily one of the blander and more long-winded tracks on the album, not one of the more eventful instrumentally in my opinion, though I do like the lyrics. There are a few cuts on here that I think kind of get lost in their own chaos a little bit, sure. Could have made a stronger statement in a more pointed way, or could have, I guess, cut things down a little bit time-wise and just been a bit more direct. But outside of that, I think this is a pretty great record. There are lots of highlights on this thing, very dark social commentary, great performances, good instrumental layering, a very raw sound. However, pretty much every track on here sounds like it's been meticulously assembled, so while it is a little rough around the edges, it's an incredibly dynamic sound too. I guess what's holding me back from feeling like this record is as good as it could possibly be is that maybe it just didn't go far enough. I mean, there's some pretty big topics and discussions and issues being tackled on this record, and as good as it is currently, I feel like it's really only starting to scratch the surface. Things definitely could have been a bit more thematic or conceptual or grander in scope. Still walking away from this album heavily impressed though, feeling a light to decent 8 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Just leave a thoughtful comment in the comments if you're feeling like you're full of thoughts. Anthony Fantano, Tropical Fuckstorm, forever.